6, 2021, Officer David Lance Dukes of the Orangeburg Department of Public Safety responded to a call regarding a man banging on a townhouse door, allegedly with a gun in his waistband. When he arrived on the scene, Officer Dukes immediately drew his gun and ordered 58-year-old disabled man Clarence Gaillard and his cousin Mario Julian, who were standing in the parking lot outside the townhouse, to the ground.
Hey, let me see your hands. Bert, get on the ground. Get on the ground. Get on the ground right here. Get on the ground. You, Burgundy shirt, get on the ground. Over here. On the ground. On the ground.
This situation escalates instantly. An officer arrives on scene, and within seconds, he pulls out his weapon and starts shouting commands at two men standing in a parking lot. One of them, a 58-year-old disabled man, tries to understand what's happening, but before he can even fully react, the officer's aggression takes over. No clear threat, no visible weapon, yet the intensity is already at maximum. And what happens next will raise serious questions about use of force.
Whether an instance of force was reasonable. These factors include, quote, the severity of the crime at issue, whether the suspect poses an immediate threat to the safety of the officers or others, and...
Now watch closely. The man is trying to comply, slowly getting down on his hands and knees exactly as ordered. But instead of allowing him to finish, the officer forcefully intervenes. In a shocking moment, he uses his foot to slam the man down, driving his head straight into the pavement. This isn't resistance. This isn't a threat. So the question becomes, was his force justified, or completely out of line?
Dependent on the factual circumstances underlying that resistance. In this situation, the severity of the crime at issue was limited at best, although Officer Dukes claimed to believe that Mr. Gaillard had a gun at the beginning of the interaction. However, at the time Officer Dukes used force against Mr. Gaillard, it was clear that he did not pose an immediate threat, as he had raised both of his empty hands above his head before getting on his hands and knees. Finally, Mr. Gaillard was not resisting arrest in any way. In fact, he was attempting to comply with Officer Dukes' commands when the force was employed. Under these circumstances, it is highly likely that a court would conclude that Officer Dukes' use of force against Mr. Gaillard was neither justified nor reasonable.
Is there a gun back there?
Ain't no gun.
By that truck.
Ain't no gun.
You're not listening, dude.
Immediately after the takedown, confusion fills the scene. The officer begins questioning the man about a weapon, but there's one major problem. No gun is found anywhere. Despite the aggressive response, the supposed threat simply doesn't exist. And now, the narrative starts to shift as the officer tries to explain what he thought he saw.
The door's unlocked.
No, he was right here. Watch him. Go watch him. There it is. Alright, that's what he had. Alright, who's the complainant? Alright, get him up.
Put your leg up.
25 cents, got one tank.
Alright, put your leg that way so you can stand up.
Alright, listen, I'm about to help you. Hold on.
As the situation slows down, the man begins speaking out. He clearly states that he has been injured, that his head was slammed into the concrete, and that he is disabled. But instead of concern, the response he gets is cold and dismissive. Meanwhile, the officer continues defending his actions, insisting the man wasn't listening. But was that really the case, or is something not adding up?
Yeah, I've been in an accident. Yeah, y'all bust my head down. You threw me down.
I sure did. You wasn't listening.
Yeah, no, it ain't. You ain't to throw me down like that. I'm disability.
Okay.
I got head problem. Yep, you threw me down. Yep, you threw me down. You threw me down. Yep, you bust my head down on the cement. Yep, you bust my head.
All right, let me tell you what happened.
His forehead.
You bust my head down on the cement.
He was in front of the car when I came up. And he was walking like this. And I thought it was a gun at first. I said, drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun. Had him at gunpoint. He's over here doing something like this.
You slammed my head.
What he was doing is putting this up behind the tire. So he comes over right here. He got his hands in his pockets. I'm telling him, let me see your hands, let me see your hands, let me see your hands. He wasn't listening. He got the, like this right here, and we went onto the ground.
Officer Dukes claims that when Mr. Gaillard was walking from behind the white vehicle, he believed that he had a gun and repeatedly told him to drop it. Officer Dukes also alleges that once Mr. Gaillard stepped in front of the vehicle, he had his hands in his pockets and repeatedly ignored requests to show his hands. However, the body cam footage shows that Mr. Gaillard actually had his hands above his head, and that while Officer Dukes repeatedly screamed at Mr. Gaillard to get on the ground, he never asked him to drop a gun or show his hands, likely because Mr. Gaillard.
Now here's where things take a serious turn. The officer claims he believed there was a gun and that the man ignored commands. But when the body cam footage is reviewed, it tells a completely different story. The man's hands were visible, raised, and there's no evidence of any weapon at all. This contradiction raises a major concern. Was the officer mistaken or intentionally misleading?
He commands to drop a gun or show his hands. It's also important to note that when Officer Dukes was reporting what happened, he did not explain the method he used to take Mr. Gaillard down. Corporal Smith's report claimed that when Mr. Gaillard did not get completely on the ground, Officer Dukes pushed him to the ground by placing his right foot on the middle of Mr. Gaillard's back. However, the incident report filed by Sergeant Aquel Polidor states that Officer Dukes, quote, jumped up and stomped Mr. Gaillard on the back of his neck with his foot, although it is unclear from the body camera footage whether Officer Dukes' foot landed on Mr. Gaillard's neck or upper back. It is certain that the version of events Officer Dukes explained to his commanding officer did not align with the body camera footage or the reports filed by his colleagues.
Yeah, your head did hit the cement.
Right, because you bust me down on the cement.
Where's the complainant?
You bust my head down on the cement.
Right here?
You bust my head. You bust my head.
Where's the complainant?
I'm trying to get the name of the complainant.
You bust my head.
What are we doing? Guess Sam's gonna check him out.
The inconsistencies don't stop there. Multiple reports from other officers begin to surface, and none of them fully match the officer's version of events. In fact, one report suggests something even more alarming, that the officer may have stomped on the man's upper body during the takedown. Now, the situation isn't just questionable, it's deeply troubling, because the truth seems to be slipping apart.
Wrong. Slam my head down. Bust my forehead. Damn right. You gonna pay me for that
shit. Mayor, I'm gonna take that into evidence of what he had. What? Well, I mean, you know, that's the reasons I did what I did. You know what I'm saying? That's where I'm coming from. Because when he was behind the truck, I couldn't see what he was doing. And I didn't know where that went. If it was still in his pockets when he come around that car with his hands in his pockets.
His dogs on. No, on camera.
Yeah,
my dog
stick.
That's fine. My dog stick.
So he can come out of cuffs? Yeah, take him out of handcuffs. Yeah, he can come out. Oh, Lord.
Good, how are you? What's going on?
Officer slammed my forehead down in the cement.
As the aftermath unfolds, the victim's cousin steps in, trying to get basic information from the officer. A simple request, a business card. But instead of transparency, the officer claims they don't even have cards to give. At this point, It feels less like confusion and more like avoidance, because accountability is starting to come into question.
When Mr. Julian asks Officer Dukes for a business card, Officer Dukes claims they are not issued cards by their department. However, Sergeant Polidor immediately corrects Officer Dukes, states that they do have cards, and provides Mr. Julian with the information he requested. If it was concluded that Officer Dukes intentionally lied to Mr. Julian in an attempt to avoid accountability for his actions, it is possible that he could be convicted of 2 common law crimes under South Carolina law: obstruction of justice and official misconduct. In the 1997 case of State versus Lyles Gray, a Court of Appeals in South Carolina.
And then, the moment that exposes everything, another officer immediately corrects him, confirming that they do have business cards. In just seconds, the truth comes out, and the earlier statement falls apart. Now it's no longer just about force. It's about honesty, credibility, and possible misconduct.
Public office failed to properly and faithfully discharge a duty imposed by law. In this situation, the court concluded that the officer obstructed justice and committed misconduct in office by failing to interview witnesses after her daughter was identified as a suspect, obtaining a false arrest warrant for another suspect, and withholding evidence. While Officer Dukes' lie about whether the department issues identification cards did not rise to the same level of misconduct, given the broad definition of both of these offenses, it is still possible that he could be convicted if charged. However, it is important to note that while some states legally require officers to provide ID to citizens upon request, South Carolina law does not place this obligation on officers. Additionally, many police departments have policies requiring that officers identify themselves, but the Orangeburg Department of Public Safety's policy is not publicly available, and it is unclear whether their policy adheres to any form of officer identification guidelines.
Yeah.
All right. Call me.
Brandon, he can get his stuff off the car.
Dukes, will you say that number?
1059.
After Mr. Gaillard was treated by EMS, he and Mr. Julian were allowed to leave. 2 days after the incident, Officer Dukes was fired from the Orangeburg Department of Public Safety for violating the department's use of force policies, which, as stated before, are not publicly available. On August 25, 2021, former Officer Dukes was charged with first-degree assault and battery, which could carry a sentence of up to 10 years in prison. As of the date of this episode, Mr. Gaillard is represented by an attorney, but he has not yet taken...
The consequences come quickly. After the incident, the officer is fired from the department, and criminal charges are filed against him. This isn't just an internal issue anymore. It's now a legal matter with serious implications. And it all started from a moment that could have been handled very differently.
For his ridiculous antics. At no point during this encounter was Mr. Dukes in any danger, and it is clear that his violent actions were motivated by his ego, not officer or civilian safety. There was absolutely no legitimate excuse for shoving Mr. Gaillard's face into...
In the end, the review is clear. The use of force was excessive. The explanation didn't match the evidence. And the attempt to avoid accountability only made things worse. This case highlights a bigger issue. When authority is misused, the consequences don't just affect one moment. They affect trust in the entire system. And situations like this are exactly why accountability...
Immediately firing Mr. Dukes and pursuing criminal charges against him. And if there were a lower grade than an F, he certainly deserves that. Sergeant Polidor gets an A+ for remaining truthful and objective throughout the encounter, ensuring that Mr. Julian was given the necessary information to follow up on the incident, and for maintaining a calm, collected, and professional attitude throughout the interaction. Although it cannot be proven with any degree of certainty, I suspect that Sergeant Polidor was highly involved in the Orangeburg Department's decision to fire and charge Mr. Dukes, and the testimony that she offered in her incident report likely played a vital role in making certain that he was held accountable for his actions. Officers who witness acts of misconduct are often placed in a position where they must consider whether reporting that misconduct is worth the potential damage to their career that could arise from pursuing accountability for the actions of their colleagues. And it is all too common to see members of law enforcement justify the actions of their peers in any way they can to avoid facing the repercussions of speaking out against them. This notion was on full display in this very interaction when Sergeant Meyer fist-bumped Mr. Dukes for an appropriate use of force without knowing any of the details beyond what Mr. Dukes had told him. I I commend Sergeant Polidor for having the courage and conviction to hold Mr. Dukes accountable for his actions, and I sincerely hope that her actions inspire other officers who witness misconduct to come forward and do the same within their departments. As for Mr. Gaillard and Mr. Julian, I cannot rightfully issue a grade to individuals whose actions were purely dictated by the conduct of the officers on the scene. Nothing the pair did was uncivil, and the two obeyed all the commands of the officers to the best of their ability without knowing the context of the encounter. It could certainly be argued that both Mr. Gaillard and Mr. Julian were both victims of police misconduct, one by way of physical violence, and the other by an attempt to avoid accountability. It should be noted that Mr. Julian made a legitimate effort to gather then Officer Dukes' personnel information, presumably in an effort to file a complaint against him, and I commend him for sensing that Mr. Dukes' actions were unlawful and doing what he could to hold him accountable.